Hey, what's up, guys? This is Ricky V, and you're listening to the Vintage Muscle Podcast. And today, I have my friend Brian from the popular YouTube channel, DadBod 2.0. How are you doing today, Brian?
Good. How are you guys doing?
We are chilling in there, man. We're hanging in here, trying to make these gains, trying to look our best, obviously. How are you doing, brother? How's the channel growing? I've seen you're pumping out videos almost every day.
Yeah, it's been a process trying to figure out what people want to watch, and it seems YouTube is pushing the shorts now, so I've had to really change up the kind of content I'm producing to actually reach a new demographic.
I see that you've done a lot of videos on the vintage muscle products. Sounds like you're very familiar with them. Tell us a little bit about your introduction to the vintage muscle line, these kind of pro hormone products, and the whole progress.
So I started out, I've used pro hormones off and on, the same kind of pro hormones for years and years from about every manufacturer out there. And I never really bought into pro hormones too much. I was always thinking about, real gear and comparing them to that. But then I got labs done, and I was on a combination of 1-andro, 4-andro, and I think 5-DHEA or R-andro. And I think there's a little epi-andro in there too. So it's a pretty good combination of products. And I'm on TRT year round. So my normal test level is somewhere around 1,100 nanograms a deciliter. I got my labs done, and I was over 3,000 on my test level. And my doctor's like, I know I'm not prescribing you that much test, so whatever else you're taking, you need to quit, because this is not healthy to be in this range. Because my test levels were so far off the charts. They were actually, the chart stopped at 3,000 and I was off the chart. So that really got me thinking about, well, these things are pretty legit. The problem is people aren't dosing them high enough.
Yes, so you got a capped test. The test, some of these tests cap at about 3,000. Right. Yeah. So these are different than the pro hormones that you and I used to mess with back in the 2010 to our era. That stuff was methylated. That stuff, you only needed a little tiny bit of it because it was about as effective and damaging as the methyl steroids that we see out there today.
Right.
The kind of pro hormones you see in the vintage line, really you need a good amount of, because you lose some during digestion, and then also the conversion, you don't get them all exactly into testosterone.
Correct. Yeah. And actually holding them under your tongue for 20 minutes or whatever, it's not a pleasant flavor, but it absorbs a lot better that way. Instead of initially having to pass through your digestive system, you're getting it absorbed directly into the bloodstream to some extent.
Yeah. So do you really like holding it under your tongue? You think you get a little extra out of it when you do that?
I don't enjoy the process, but I've actually experimented with it a bit. I was watching another YouTuber, a couple of YouTubers having a discussion about oral steroids specifically, and SARMs, and how putting them under the tongue is actually far more beneficial. And this one guy, he's a pro bodybuilder, was saying that he knows a lot of pro bodybuilders that he trains with or has trained himself that use stuff like Anadrol year round, and instead of just swallowing the pill, they're crushing them up and holding them under their tongue for about 20 minutes, and they're able to keep their liver enzymes in a very normal range. They'll take like Tudcar or whatever else, but generally speaking, when somebody's taking one of these really powerful steroids orally, they're swallowing the capsule, it's hitting the liver hard, and you spike the liver enzymes, right? And they're not seeing that when guys are putting it sublingually. And so that's a good indicator to me that it's a valid way of doing it.
That's interesting. See, the methylated stuff, it hurts your liver at first pass, right?
Right.
But if you injected some methylated stuff, like in the case of something like Winstrol, which it was the same Winstrol hormone, you're just injecting it, you'd also get a spike in liver enzymes anyway, because it would make it across the liver at some point anyway.
It does,
now,
yeah.
Yeah. Now it's interesting that the stuff that's not modified that way, doesn't have the methyl group, actually is not hurting the liver that way. It's interesting.
Yeah.
And the tongue is and under the tongue is definitely a great way to get some compounds to pass through the body. Definitely is. I didn't know. I didn't think with doing it daily if you would get as much out of it. But now listening to you a little bit, I guess it makes sense that doing it daily, you get more out of it. I always felt this though, um, and this is just my feeling from having tried sublingually. I always felt that after a few days on it, I probably wasn't getting like the texture of under my tongue changed a little bit, and I wasn't getting as much in, probably because of the alcohol, maybe my body making a bit of the skin a little thicker there to protect, I think, because it does burn a little bit. It's not a pleasant feeling at all.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, either way, even if you hold it under your tongue for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, at some point you're going to wind up swallowing it, right? So either way, it's getting ingested into your body. The idea of holding it under your tongue is that maybe some of the prohormone gets absorbed before passing through the liver. And so even if it's minimal, I would see that as a benefit. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a possibility that the cells would stop being so receptive underneath the tongue after a while. But either way, then you just swallow it, right? So you're still getting the benefit out of it.
For over the counter products, for stuff that you would get, over the counter, you're kind of sort of not supposed to tell people to hold it under their tongue, because at that point it's not oral, it's kind of a sublingual, and it changes the legalities of it a little bit. But shit, we still tell people to hold it under the tongue as the end of it. But there definitely is a bit of a different classification, because it does make it more effective. Which of the hormones do you like over these over-the-counter hormones? Which are the ones you go to, and are there any that just not hot about that you don't like?
I think that I like all of them. The biggest issue I see in the fitness community with pro hormones, especially the ones that are legal right now, like what Vintage carries, guys are not dosing them high enough. So if you start doing some research on them, a lot of guys benefit when they hit, like with 400, 200 milligrams per day, or 19 or, 3, 4, 500 milligrams a day, which are huge, huge doses, right? But for me, what I found is a combination of 1-andro, 4-andro, and then R-andro and possibly epi-andro together in a specific ratio. You can basically mimic injectable testosterone blood levels relatively easy. And so the fact that you get that full portfolio of conversion, you're not just getting testosterone, you're also getting the DHEA in there, et cetera. So it's as valuable, in my opinion, at the right dose as actually using testosterone. And I think in the long run, it might be a better bet, because, a lot of guys don't like using needles, or maybe they don't want to use topicals. Maybe they got a new baby and don't want to have it rub off on the baby or something, right? And so using something orally that could replace steroidal testosterone might be a very valid, I guess, aspect of that in the future. The problem, like I said, those guys don't realize how high the doses need to be in order to get the full benefit, if you're comparing it to, say, 200 milligrams a week of test, right?
What do you think? Let's say 200 milligrams a week of test. If you had to kind of mimic that with these pro hormones, what do you think would be a reasonable a daily, and which one to use to mimic that testosterone?
So to mimic test, I think the average guy could do that by using 100 milligrams of 1-andro, 200 milligrams of 4-andro, 100 milligrams of R-andro, and if you really want to spice it up, throw in about 400 milligrams of epi-andro.
And that's a week or per day?
Per day.
That's quite a bit, isn't it? A lot of guys don't think they can do as much, and I always tell them, like, hey man, there's steroid users out there stepping on stage doing 5 grams, 5,000 milligrams a week of stuff. And that's just steroids on top of other things. Yeah, if you want to use a little bit more of the vintage muscle line of these pro hormones, these DHEAs, you can stack them on pretty high. You won't have a problem.
Yeah, I wouldn't be concerned about using too much of them, right? I mean, some guys might develop acne or whatever else, but that's to be expected anytime you raise your testosterone levels significantly. Some guys are prone to acne, or, any of a multitude of issues that are indicators that it really is working. And so when you start seeing those, you can pretty well tell yourself and be confident that it actually is doing what it's supposed to do at the higher dose.
And not only is it doing what it's supposed to do, but You're getting these products over the counter in the U.S. The cleanliness, the potency of them is guaranteed. Really, the underground steroid scene and even the underground SARMs scene, which we're going to talk a little bit about here, it's become real cowboy town, man. These guys are putting in whatever they want. There is no real recourse. There is no real anything. At least the stuff you grab over the counter. The FDA is mystery shopping these places all the time and testing this stuff for contaminants and testing it for potency. And these guys have a license that they can they're putting on the line every time they make a product for you when they're making these over-the-counter pro hormones, what we're discussing right now, like the vintage muscle line. When you get into stuff that people are making in the underground in bathtubs for you, you get into a real dicey situation because a lot of this stuff is contaminated. It's not properly tested. A lot of the times scandals pop up on social. You've seen these, I'm sure, bro, where someone is supposed to be putting something in their SARM product or in their juice that they really, and they're not, and it becomes a big scandal and it becomes a real big thing, right? You've seen that around the way.
Yeah, I've seen that quite a bit, and I'll have to admit, in the last 2 years or so, it's become less of an issue in the SARMs industry because it's become so competitive. And with social media and people talking about these companies out there, a bad company pretty well gets called out very quickly. And there's a lot of guys on Reddit that'll actually buy the product and send it off for testing and then show the test results online. So that's kind of cool. But initially, yeah, you're absolutely right. For a long time, probably the first, I don't know, 10 years that SARMs were hitting the market, they weren't really mainstream yet. There was so many companies out there that were spiking with actual steroids, or they were dosed extremely low, or they mixed pro hormones in, or something like that. And guys are getting all kinds of wild side effects and blaming the SARMs for the side effects when in reality there was something else mixed into them. And so, yeah, you're right. The quality control is a huge issue. And so having a company that manufactures an FDA inspected lab is very important. Having third-party testing is very important. And I think that holds true with any supplement you're going to be taking. Anybody can go down and buy, 30 pounds of whatever off of Alibaba and have it shipped in and throw it in a capsule and sell it online, right? So you got to be selective and make sure you're doing your background checks on each company.
Yeah, and what the issue is, and I don't know if this issue is hitting SARMs as much as steroids, but when it comes to just some of these banned scheduled substances like the testosterone, like Anavar, some of these things, the good Chinese labs aren't even allowed to make it anymore. They themselves are making it sort of underground anyway. And so some of these underground manufacturers in China, they might be making, chemical lubricants right next to where they're making your steroids, because at this point they're making it for the underground. Because once the stuff is made, the control as to who it's sold to and all that has gotten pretty tight in places like China. Even for a while, and I don't know if this is a problem still. Maybe you could tell us. For a while, some of the substrate to make S4, to make Andarin, was scarce. You couldn't find it, and they had to do something with some of these regulations. When it comes to the pro hormones, to the DHEAs, these are made by the top premier companies because they're not controlled the way testosterone Anabar is. And so you're always going to get better, cleaner product. When it comes to potency is one thing, are you getting the amount that you're paying for? But then on top of that, there's also heavy metal contamination. There's also other sorts of chemical contamination. And those are some of the more worrisome things when you buy stuff that's really underground, black market, that it's not regulated. Have you heard any things when it comes to the cleanliness and heavy metals and contamination and some of these raw materials? And do you remember about the Andarin S4 shortage and anything you could tell us about that?
So yeah, there was a shortage of the S4, the Andarin. There was an issue also with LGD 4033 that the patent holder for LGD 4033 sent out cease and desist letters to everybody that was selling it. So for a while there was the market got flooded with fake LGD 4033 because they didn't want to get sued. They would label it as something else, right? Um, that being said, there's always supply issues going on when you're having to bring something in from overseas. We saw that during this little, pandemic, whatever you want to call it, and it became a big issue for a long time because manufacturers couldn't get the product from overseas, and everybody who was in manufacturing was focused on other stuff like making masks, right? And so there was a huge issue with getting product, and when it comes to like pro hormones and SARMs and stuff like that, it's really on the manufacturer to do a quality check and to do lab tests on the bulk compound when they actually receive them, right? And so making sure your manufacturer is doing that is really important.
Yeah, I mean, some of the good places, because of compliance, you're supposed to either send batches out for testing or have an HPLC machine in-house. Vintage Muscle has an HPLC machine in-house, which I thought is a little crazy to go spend that much, but for just speed and for them just having control over the whole operation, the whole thing, they have in-house testing of the raw materials. And that's really important because, again, potency is one thing, man. Potency is one thing. Am I getting what I'm paying for? Yes. But there's also a lot of contamination that can happen to these materials during the manufacturing process. There's a lot of contamination that could happen if what these materials are being manufactured in wasn't properly cleaned, beforehand. So I definitely always get very concerned about black market, buying black market stuff that way. I always try to get my hands on as much either over the counter or human use stuff that I can get out there when I'm running cycles and such. So talking about cycles a little bit, when is the last time you used any of these pros, and what did you use and what were your effects?
So I'm on TRT year round, and I have been for a couple of years now. But every once in a while, I'll throw some in on top of the TRT just to play around, right? And so my experience is going to be a lot different than what somebody who is not on TRT would experience. For me, they definitely do benefit the TRT if I'm, depending on what I'm taking. For example, if I'm using 19 NOR, I do expect to feel like my joints are more lubricated. I feel like I'm adding some strength. There's obvious muscle growth, and it converts to 19 NOR, right? So you should be able to expect that. And like I said, it's really dose dependent. To be able to add to my TRT with a pro hormone and gain additional benefit is pretty exciting in my opinion. I've used all of them really since I've been on TRT, and they all do what they're supposed to do at the correct dose. Especially something like, Epiandro or, like I said, 19 NOR are really probably my favorites when it comes to the pro hormones because, the 19 NOR, you can add some muscle bulk. The Epiandro kind of leans you out, hardens you up a little bit. And I can't use Winstrol. It dries out my joints too bad, but the Epiandro works just fine for me. So having those available and legal from a good quality source is very, very nice.
The Epiandro I always felt really increased my sex drive pretty quickly, like within minutes of the first dose. Have you noticed that as well?
I hadn't noticed that so much with the Epiandro. The one testosterone or one DHEA, one andro, I did notice that from. And same with 4-andro a little bit. I actually found that mixing them, like I'd mentioned earlier, you get an instant increase in testosterone level. And I was actually thinking it would be interesting if somebody was to come out with a porn stack because I was looking into the porn industry and all the adult actors are using something like test propionate and a combination of other things before performing, right? So I was thinking you could probably mimic that really closely with a combination of peptides and pro hormones. And so that's always been something that's fascinated me. yes, there's definitely an instant spike. I mean, you're taking it orally, sublingually, whatever, and it's hitting your bloodstream very, very quickly. So that's definitely a possibility.
Oh, it's almost there. There is a gas station pill right now that has dehydro epiandrosterone in it. It's got DHEA in it, and
Really?
it's a yep, it's a gas station a dick pill. I'll shoot you the name via text afterwards. But yeah, it was gas station standing in line, and they have a whole little rack of pills there. And I'm always curious about what supplements guys are putting in this stuff. And there was one that had DHEA in it, a good dose of it too, like 50 meg, 50, 75 megs for the
Mhm.
tablet, and along with, other stuff, some trebulas, but trebulas and toncatali, but obviously it's all sprinkled in there, right? It's like a
Right.
300 milligram formula, like 10 different herbs. But
Mhm.
they led the list with the DHEA. I thought that was pretty nifty.
That is interesting. And DHEA, just as pure form DHEA, can convert to a wide number of different hormones. When you have the specific pro hormones, they tend not to convert like regular DHEA would, right? So for those that don't know, regular DHEA can be taken and it'll convert to testosterone or DHT or estrogen or whatever your body is needing. DHEA naturally occurs within the human body, and it's a precursor to most of the sex steroids that are used in the body. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so what we call regular DHEA, it's actually 5-DHEA. And that one can pretty much, as Brian was saying, turn into a lot of different things. The ones that we want to get in is 1-DHEA, 4-DHEA, 19 nor DHEA, obviously, vintage muscle stuff, and those the structure of that hormone, just not a suitable structure for some of the enzymes that would turn it into female type of hormones. It's just not the kind of structure they can affect it properly. So those will tend to stay in the androgen male realm of conversions. And this is why they're so effective, is the ones we like, man. Epiandrosterone has always been an interesting one to me because everything I kind of know about it shouldn't be as good of a cutting hormone as it is. But I mean, man, stuff gets you pretty lean, doesn't it?
It does. It's a great pro hormone. I wonder how much longer the government's going to allow us to keep using them, right? So stockpiling is good. Um, yeah. Um,
They get rid of anything that's good. What's really safeties for so long is that they're actually naturally occurring. A lot of this stuff that we used around the 2010 era, 2005 on to about 2014 when everything got banned.
mhm.
Some of that stuff just wasn't naturally occurring in nature, just didn't exist. We just modified testosterone in so many different ways and then put it out there for people to use. But the 1, 5, 4, 19 nors, these all do happen in nature, in our bodies, even. It's just conversions that happen in your body naturally. We're just adding way more of it when we use these pro hormones, but they're all pretty natural. Am I correct? I mean, that's the reason they haven't. I mean, they could try to go after them, but it's not as easy to ban them.
Oh yeah, definitely. Um, they all naturally occur in the body, and your body's converting them, and um, it's as close to natural as you can get while still being somewhat enhanced, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely is. I do like. I mean, a ton of guys stack these pro hormones on top of their TRT. A lot of guys run them along with SARMs. They're very effective to run along with your SARMs. I've ran on a cutting cycle. I've actually ran Anavar with epiandrosterone with one that DHEA. I
Oh, really?
just, yeah, I just had them, so I just said, "Fuck it, let me just stack them on." I had a nice little cutting a cycle, like a little cutting program. Did that last year. Got nice and lean for the summer. But yeah, I mean, you could just stack them on with anything. Now, let's talk just a little bit more about what are the main differences between these products, these ingredients, and SARM, because I see a lot of guys confused out there. A lot of guys out there don't even really understand what the fuck SARMs even are. They don't. I mean, I have no clue. So, you want to kind of kick it off, and then I'll plug in. How would we differentiate? What can we tell people the biggest difference between these products and the SARMs that they're seeing out there?
So it's pretty simple, really. All these pro hormones are hormonal. It's in the name, they're hormones, pro hormones, right? So SARM stands for selective androgen receptor modulator. They're non hormonal. So, that being said, pro hormones and steroids work through hormonal pathways to activate the androgen receptors and build muscle, right? And that's just like the dummy version of it. SARMs avoid tweaking the hormones, and they go directly to the androgen receptors in the muscle and stimulate them to grow. So that's really the difference between, a steroid or pro hormone versus a SARM. Hormonal versus non-hormonal. Indirect androgen activation versus direct androgen activation.
All right, that's a good explanation. So I'll take it a little bit further. Yeah, and all these SARMs were basically created in a laboratory. The pro hormones that we're discussing, the 1,4 DHA, 5 DHA, 19, or all these things, they're pretty well naturally occurring. When it comes to SARMs, the shape of the makeup of them looks nothing like some of the stuff that we're using. It looks like nothing like testosterone. Looks nothing. I think there's only one of them. I can't remember off the top of my head that has a similar ring structure to our testosterone. SARMs are complete Frankenstein modification, synthetic compounds that we made. And yes, they do have a face of them. A part of them can attach to the androgen receptor and cause different effects on selective receptors. But overall, they're not a suitable structure for the majority of enzymes in your body that would normally break down or modify a hormone or metabolize a hormone. That they're just not suitable. They're not anywhere really near close to what nature. They're completely different Frankenstein structures that just happen attached to those androgen receptors. But yeah, I mean, 1 DHEA or 4 DHEA, 19, or if I drew them on paper for you and handed it to you without pointing out where the different molecules are, you'd have a hard time figuring out which one is which. You'd have to know a little something to really figure out which one is which. But pretty much, if you look at GW or Osterin or S4 or LGD, you look at any of those, you look at a graph of them on paper, they look completely different. They look nothing like each other. And not only look nothing like each other, they look nothing like testosterone or DHEA would look. They're really new, completely synthetic, modified structures, unlike anything that ever existed in nature. So one of the reasons I'm way more hesitant to slam on the SARMs, dude. I'm really worried that we're gonna have some guys who have some issues down the line from just overdoing these SARMs and not realizing that there were some serious problems that could come from it.
Yeah, there's always the potential for that. Like you said, it's pretty interesting looking at pro hormones and the structure, compared to natural testosterone. They're very, very similar. And then, like you said, with the SARMs, a SARM, for those of you who haven't looked at a chemical structure of a SARM, it's very much like, how would I explain this? Like, those rubber band balls. If you had one of those, but put space in between the rubber bands, it would kind of look like that. And you can kind of think of a SARM as like a precision weapon. So a pro hormone, you kind of got like a bomb, right? And it kind of targets the majority of an area, whereas a SARM was designed to be very, very precise. And where they're going with SARMs now is pretty fascinating. I mean, they're an advanced medical tool, and they're developing them for a lot of different things, such as breast cancer, obviously in females. And then even more interesting, I came across this research the other night where they're developing all these new versions of SARMs to target the prostate, right? So men get different types of prostate cancer, prostate issues, whatever, and they're actually creating new SARMs to target very, very specific things within the prostate. So, yeah, I mean, the structure being, I mean, yeah, you can't even compare them structurally. You can't even compare how they're used. And yeah, there's always a potential with something new. for issues down the road we don't know about. But I mean, look at what we've been putting in our bodies that doesn't even have 2 years of research in it, right? So you got to take everything with a grain of salt.
Yeah, for sure. I know about 5 years ago that some information started to come out that Trembolone might cause Parkinson's. And there hasn't been a lot of follow-up information about this since. And so that's, it's definitely of a concern. But if you look at today, right, you look at a 35-year-old today versus what a 35-year-old looked 30, 40 years ago. Um, by 35 back in the day, people used to look like shit, you know. Um,
Hmm.
like people looked old as fuck.
Hmm.
Um, back in the day, I don't know if it's perception. Maybe people style their hair and dress a little snappier now and go to the gym more. Who knows what it is, bro? But I think definitely, and it goes along with the theme of your channel, DadBod 2.0, right?
Right.
it's it's a we're looking. I think we're looking younger and better as we get older now, man.
Yeah, and there's a lot of factors that play into that too. I mean, you think back in the 1920s, guys worked in the coal mine for 10, 12, 18 hours a day. I mean, there was a lot of hard physical labor as a standard of living back then, right? And a lot of that was outdoors or in a factory that was not climate controlled. So people lived in a society where the body was abused way, way more than it is nowadays. And I do a lot of reading on stuff that's not just related to fitness, right? And one of the books that I've been reading recently is statistics on basically societies. And one of the things that they've been projecting is that by, I think it was 2047, the average human life will be over 120 years based on the projections of advancement in medical technology, et cetera. But hopping back real quick, you mentioned Trembolone, and the only SARM that has a somewhat similar structure to a steroid is YK11. And that one has been argued the same as Trembolone as far as either of them could be labeled as a SARM or a steroid, which is kind of interesting. Side note. But yeah, so as we move forward in society, with time, there's all these new advancements coming out. You got SARMs coming out. They've been out for a while. Now peptides are starting to become popular. There's always something out there that's, the new big thing. And really the only thing that moves those forward is guys like me who experiment on ourselves to figure out what they're going to do. And there's always a risk. You can take any steroid that's been around for 100 years and 10 different people, and they're each going to have a different reaction to it, short term and long term, right? So it's one of those things. If you're going to choose to enhance your body with a chemical or a hormone or a steroid, whatever, you need to keep in mind that you might be one of those unlucky people that has some serious side effects.
Yeah, they're just guys that can't, that their bodies are just not made to handle some of these anabolics. They're guys who will have one little cycle, do one little thing, and start breaking out. I remember during the time where Monster Drol, Bistro was around. Some dudes would have just one bottle, and halfway through the bottle, their left nipple would be lactating. And there were other guys who slammed 3 bottles a year of that stuff, grew like a weed, and just didn't care. Same thing with hair loss. Same thing with acne. There are just some dudes out there that they get a little bit of testosterone in them, shoot a little bit of equipoise, and man, their back breaks out. They just can't handle it. But
Yeah.
then you get other guys out there who just a little bit of the sauce, and they're fine. Um, some guys can do a lot. If you look at the Mr. Olympia competitors, a lot of guys get up there with a full head of hair, running milligrams and milligrams of juice every week, and they get up there full head of hair and all. And then you get some guys who do a little bit of TRT, and then they start to shed hair. It's really genetics and the ability to handle the drugs really can dictate a lot of what you can do or not.
It does. And there's a lot of misinformation, especially if you get on Reddit. And one um, annoyance to me with the fitness community is how everybody wants to attack estrogen, right? And estrogen is an extremely important hormone when it comes to building muscle and maintaining your body, bone strength, the ability to develop muscle, the skin health, a whole host of different things rely on having estrogen, right? And bouncing back to Beastrol, that was my favorite steroid, Superdrol, right? Called it Beastrol. My favorite steroid of all time. I got huge on that stuff, but I had the same issue as far as, nipple sensitivity. I have eventually developed pretty bad gyno from it and actually wound up having to have gyno surgery. And guys online were saying, oh, well, you need to just take an AI and block your estrogen. Well, you do that, and all of a sudden your joints are dry and you're still growing boobs. People weren't realizing that it was spiking prolactin. And so, there's a lot of issues because guys will hop on these cycles. They've never done bloods before, never had labs before. And then they start having side effects. They don't get labs done then either. And then they really don't know what's going on. So they're just, shooting into the dark with different hormones or hormone blockers, trying to self-diagnose. And sometimes they're way off, and that can really compound the problems.
Yeah, the nipple issues that you get from prolactin are different than the ones you get from just estrogen.
Yeah, but
No.
guys online often don't realize that,
Yeah, I mean, I know prolactin has been known to make guys lactate without growing a lump or without growing boobs, maybe or maybe just a very small mass, and next thing you know, your nipple is lactating, but there is no real kind of growth.
Right.
Where some estrogen problems, your nipples will start growing and getting puffy sometimes before you even really feel it all. Even though, I mean, with me, I get the sensitivity well before I get any growth or any puffiness, but most guys are not like that. So let's leave people with because we're getting close to the end here. Let's leave people with some kind of practical advice. So what would be a couple, one or two different examples of stacks that someone, let's say, could do if they're already on TRT in order to take advantage of some of these over-the-counter pro hormones to boost their TRT? What's a good protocol to run?
Anything from vintage would be good as an addition. It depends really on your goal. The Epiandro is probably one of my favorites all around. I like something that hardens me up and leans me out, right? If you're wanting to get a boost in sex drive, taking a big dose of 1-andro and 4-andro could really help, or the Epiandro. I mean, you really can't go wrong, right? But my advice to anybody out there is to get labs done on a regular basis, because that's the biggest issue I see. Long-term health issues could usually be found ahead of time and prevented if guys had actually been doing their labs, every 6 months or something. Make sure your cholesterol's good, make sure your blood pressure's good, make sure your your liver enzymes are good, all that kind of stuff. Make sure your hormones are staying balanced, and you can't do that accurately without labs. So that would be my biggest piece of advice. If you're going to be doing anything, also be checking your labs and staying healthy long term.
Yeah, lab work is huge for sure. For sure, you got to make sure to know what's going on inside of your body. Yeah, Epiandro is good. I mean, there's some good stacks out of the line that you could drop right on top of your TRT and get great results from it.
For sure,
definitely. Well, all right, my man. Hey, listen, brother. Thank you very much for your time today. It's a great interview. Let's tell people, everyone, about your channel. What's the best way to find you, your website, all that good stuff, so people can check up on you.
Yeah, so my YouTube channel is DadBod 2.0. My website is dadbod2.fit, and I'm on Instagram with the same handle, dadbod2fit.
DadBod 2.0 on YouTube. And as always, come check us out. Vintage Muscle Times, the podcast. See you guys next week.
All right, take care. Thanks for having me on.
Take care, Brian.